1. The lantern that waited in the fog. I'd been hiking the Blue Ridge for most of my life. Grew up nearby, in a weather-beaten house where the mountain wind curled through the cracks in the siding, and the ridgelines were more familiar to me than any city street ever could be. My father took me out before I could walk properly, showed me how to tell time by the moss, and how to hear the difference between a fox call and something not quite right. I trusted those woods. I knew the way their moods shifted before a storm, how the light grew gold and quiet in October, how the fog moved low and slow when rain was coming. That morning, I left before sunrise. I just wanted a quiet day to myself. No phone, no voices. Figured I'd loop down past Lost Turkey Trail, eat lunch by the overlook, and be back before dark. But the fog never lifted. It should have burned off by 10 or 11. That soft, rolling kind that dances through the trees and makes you feel like you're walking through a dream. But this was different, thicker, denser. The kind of fog that makes you feel like the world's pressing in from all sides. I should have turned back. I remember thinking that even then. But the stillness was beautiful in its own eerie way. I kept walking, past the usual markers, past the crooked pine where a family of raccoons used to nest, past the old, rusted sign that barely said danger anymore. I stopped around noon, sat on a flat rock to eat a peanut butter sandwich, and that's when I saw it. A light, not bright, amber, like the glow of a kerosene lantern. It was floating, just hanging there, maybe 6 feet off the ground, motionless between two birch trunks about 50 yards ahead. No sound, no rustling. I stared at it for a good minute, thinking maybe it was another hiker, somebody camping, but no one answered when I called out. "Hello?" I yelled. Nothing. Then the light flickered, not like a candle, but more like it blinked, dimmed once, sharply, and brightened again. I took a few steps forward. That's when it started moving, not fast. It drifted maybe 10 or 15 feet further into the woods, like it was trying to keep just enough distance to stay out of reach. I'm not proud to admit this, but I followed. I didn't mean to, not at first, but something about it felt familiar. Not the light itself, but the way it moved, like it knew I was watching, like it wanted me to. My mind made excuses. Maybe it was a ranger, maybe someone needed help, but it never felt like help. Not really. The woods got stranger the further I went, thicker. The trees leaned differently, their limbs gnarled like they were reaching for something. The air was wet, not just fog wet, but heavy, like a storm was building inside the trees. My boots sank into soft ground that hadn't been that way earlier. It smelled like something rotting deep under the soil. The light stayed just ahead, always a little too far to touch. I tried to mark my steps, broke branches, scraped bark with my knife, but the fog swallowed everything. There were no echoes, no birds, just that light, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. I don't know how long I walked, an hour, maybe 2. The sun should have been overhead, but I never saw it. The fog glowed a dull grey, no direction to it. I tried turning back, retracing my steps, but nothing looked right. The trees were wrong. The ground sloped differently. And when I turned, the light was behind me now, still there, still waiting. That's when I panicked. Not full-on running panic, but the kind that gets under your ribs and makes you move faster than you should. I tried finding high ground, thinking maybe I could see the overlook from the ridge. Climbed a steep incline, hands digging into wet dirt, boots slipping on moss. At the top, I saw nothing but fog and trees. The light had followed me. I sat down under a pine and forced myself to breathe slowly. I wasn't new to the woods. I'd gotten turned around before. Just needed to find a stream, follow it downhill. I stood, turned to check my compass, and froze. It wasn't just a light anymore, it was closer. Still hovering, still amber, but I could see more now. The shape around it, faint but there, like the suggestion of a person, a figure, not glowing exactly. More like the light was inside it trying to push out. It didn't move, neither did I. I don't know how long we stayed like that, a minute, maybe more. Then the fog shifted, just a breeze or the air pretending to move, and the light was gone. No sound, no trace. I ran, didn't care about bearings, didn't care about the trail. I ran downhill, cutting through underbrush, branches clawing at my jacket. I ran until my legs burned and my throat felt raw. When I stopped, it was only because I couldn't run anymore. And the light was there again, just over my shoulder, behind the trees, not following this time, just watching. I didn't sleep that night, didn't build a fire, just curled up against a rock outcropping and waited for daylight. But daylight never came. The fog grew brighter, then dimmer, but the sun never broke through. My watch stopped working. My phone battery died, even though it had been full that morning. I started marking time by hunger. 3 meals, 4. I tried walking again, picked a direction and stuck to it. I hoped I'd hit a road, a stream, anything, but the forest didn't end. No birds, no planes overhead, no wind, just that same wet silence and the occasional flicker of amber light, always nearby, never closer, never gone. Once, I screamed, just to hear something real. My voice echoed back, but it wasn't right. It came back softer, warmer, like someone mimicking me. The 5th night, I think it was the 5th. I woke up to find the light inches from my face, not hovering anymore, lying beside me, level with the ground, like it had curled up to sleep. My skin felt warm on that side, like it had been near a fire, but the rest of the air was ice. I didn't move, I just watched it. It pulsed slow and deep, like breath, like it was dreaming. When I blinked, it was gone. That was the only night it came that close. After that, it went back to its game, always there, just behind me, just ahead, watching, guiding, or keeping me in. I don't remember how I got out. One morning, I stumbled out onto a gravel road. A forestry truck nearly hit me. The ranger said I looked like I hadn't eaten in a week. My clothes were shredded, my boots were soaked. I had scratches across my chest I didn't remember getting. They said I'd gone missing for 3 days. Search teams had combed the area. I'd walked in circles less than a mile from where I started. I don't believe them. I don't go into the woods anymore. Can't. Not even for a short walk. I still see the fog sometimes, the kind that hugs the hills and curls across the treetops. When I do, I stay inside, close the blinds, wait for it to pass. Because sometimes, just sometimes, in the corner of my vision, I see that flicker again. Amber, waiting. 2 lights in the shape of a man. I was coming off a double shift at the mill, running on fumes and black coffee when I started down Cragg's Hollow. Folks around here know not to take that stretch after dark if they can help it. Too many wrecks, too many stories. But I didn't have the energy for the long detour through Boone Ridge. My hands were sore, lungs full of sawdust, and all I wanted was a hot shower and a quiet bed. Cragg's Hollow isn't much more than a winding scar carved into the side of a mountain. No lights, no cell signal, and barely enough room for 2 trucks to pass, if one doesn't mind losing a mirror. Trees press up against the road like they want to swallow it back into the forest. It's always been quiet there, too quiet. No birds, no frogs, just the sound of tires over cracked pavement and the occasional snap of something in the underbrush that you tell yourself was just a raccoon. It was just past the old gravel quarry that I saw it. At first, I thought it was someone in the road. Maybe a lost hiker, maybe drunk. I tapped the brakes and squinted through the windshield. That's when I realized it wasn't a person. It was a shape, sure. Tall, standing upright, arms at its sides. But it wasn't flesh and bone. It was light, white, blue, flickering like an electrical storm trapped in a body. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there, about 30 feet ahead, centered in the lane. My heart kicked. I eased my foot down on the brake and rolled the truck to a stop, engine idling, headlights on it. But the light thing didn't cast a shadow, didn't reflect. It was like looking at lightning frozen in place, humming faintly against the quiet. No sound but the tick of my hazard lights and the low drone of the engine. I didn't know why I didn't back up. Should have thrown it in reverse, turned around and peeled out the way I came. But I didn't. I just sat there, staring at it. Something about the shape felt familiar. Not in any way I could explain. Not like a face you recognize. More like how you know a tune before the lyrics come back to you. And then it moved. Not toward me. No sudden jump. It just stepped, calmly, off the center of the road and into the woods. Disappeared behind the tree line without a sound. The light didn't trail. It didn't fade. 1 second it was there. The next, it wasn't. I sat frozen for a while after that. I don't know how long. Long enough for the engine fan to cycle off and the cab to start cooling. The feeling in my chest wouldn't quit. A sort of weight. Like grief. I knew that shape. I just didn't know how yet. Eventually, I got out. Don't ask me why. Maybe I thought if I stood where it had stood, I'd see something, understand something. Maybe I was too tired to think better. I stepped into the cold night air and walked up the road. My boots scuffed at the gravel where it had stood, but there was nothing. No footprints. No heat. No sound. I turned toward the woods. I don't remember making the decision, but I took 3 steps into the trees, and I saw it again. Not far. Down in the hollow, maybe 50 yards through the brush. Standing still between 2 sycamores. The shape of a man, only light, flickering just faintly, like a dying star. I whispered a name. I don't know which one, but it felt like the right one. The light moved deeper. I followed. Cragg's Hollow isn't a place you go wandering off trail. The land drops fast and sharp, slick with moss and runoff. But somehow, my boots found their footing. The trees thinned a little as I descended, and everything felt damp, not from rain, but like the ground had soaked up something that wouldn't dry. My breath clouded in front of me. I hadn't brought a coat. The cold had a bite that didn't feel like air. The light didn't hurry. It paused every now and then like it was waiting. I never caught up, never got closer than 30 feet, but it didn't leave. Just kept guiding me through a forest I thought I knew, but didn't. There was a clearing eventually, a low basin where the trees gave way to a ring of stone. I'd never seen it before, not on any topo map, not in all my years hunting and hiking these hills. At the center was a sunken pit, like an old foundation swallowed by earth and time, and in the center of that stood the light. It was still the shape of a man. Arms at its sides, shoulders a little slumped. I knew that posture. I'd seen it every day for 16 years. In my father. In the way he stood when he came home from the mill, tired, never talking much, just staring out at the woods like he was waiting for something to come back to him. He went missing when I was 18, never came home. They said he likely fell into a ravine or got mauled by a bear. But part of me never bought that. He knew these woods better than anyone. He wouldn't just go. I stepped into the clearing. The air changed. Not the temperature, the pressure. Like the whole world had exhaled and left me standing in the vacuum. The trees around the clearing weren't just dead. They were wrong. Twisted back toward the center. as if they'd grown in reverse. Dragged inward by something buried deep, the light didn't move. It flickered again, stronger, and then I heard it. A voice, not loud, not human either. It didn't come from the shape, it came from everywhere, from inside me. You know me. I froze. It didn't sound like my father, didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard, but it felt like him, like his silence, his weight, his sadness. I wanted to speak. My mouth wouldn't work. The light stepped forward. I stepped back, and it stopped. We stood there for a long time, him flickering. I'm shaking. The voice didn't come again. Nothing did. Eventually I turned. I didn't run, I didn't look back. I walked, slow and quiet, up through the trees until the clearing was lost behind me. The light didn't follow. I found the road again at dawn, or what felt like dawn. The sky was a pale grey, no sun, just enough light to see by. My truck was still idling. The door is wide open, headlights cutting across empty gravel. I climbed in, drove home. I haven't spoken about it to anyone. Not really. I told folks I'd stopped for a piss and got turned around in the dark. They nodded, shrugged. But I know what I saw. I know that light. I know that shape. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving home from work, I take the long way around Cragg's Hollow. Not because I'm scared, because I'm afraid I'll see him again. And this time, I might follow. 3. They said her lantern still burns. Coldwater Creek cuts through the hills about 10 miles outside of town. Too shallow for rafting, too loud to sleep next to, and too wild for most campers. But it was always where I went when I needed to be alone. Granny used to say the water there had memory. She'd sit on the porch with her coffee, eyes fogged from age and years of grief, and tell us about Lantern Lizzie, the girl who never came home after the flood of 42, said her brother had gone missing first, washed downriver or taken by something darker, and Lizzie went out in the middle of the storm to find him, carrying nothing but a kerosene lantern and the kind of hope only grief can build. Neither of them came back. But sometimes, after a hard rain, folks claimed you could still see that light drifting along the creek, moving upstream like it had somewhere to be. Granny never said it to scare us. She said it like she missed her. I never believed it, not really. Every hollow in Appalachia has its stories. Women in white, dogs that speak, lights that hum like they're breathing. Lizzie's was just one of those things that lived in the space between thunderclaps. Until the summer I camped there with Jody. We were 17 and stupid, the kind of kids who needed a reason to feel something. I had just lost my first real job working freight nights at the co-op, and Jody had broken up with her 5th soulmate of the year. We loaded up a couple of ratty packs, grabbed Dad's old tent from the shed, and hiked the 2 miles in from Granger's Pass before noon. The weather was clean, skies high and blue. If you didn't know better, you'd never guess a storm was coming. We found a flat patch just up from the waterline, beneath a crooked sycamore. The trees were dense enough to keep the worst wind off, but still let through the smell of the river, earthy, sharp, always moving. We pitched the tent, built a small ring of stones for the fire, and spent most of the afternoon talking about everything except what we were actually running from. The kind of conversation that only happens in the woods, where there's no signal and no one listening. By nightfall, the wind had changed. Not loud, but heavy. Like something leaning through the trees. Clouds moved in faster than I expected, thick, flat-bottomed, crawling low. We should have packed it up then, but when you're 17, you think storms are just an inconvenience, not a warning. We stayed up late, listening to the water fight against the rocks. Jody told me again about the time she swore she saw a man with no eyes walking down the ridge near her house. I laughed. She told me she'd punch me in the throat if I kept calling her dramatic. I told her she wouldn't reach. We ate gas station jerky and drank flat soda until the fire cracked down to coals and the trees started creaking like they were speaking to each other. It must have been after 2 when I woke up. The storm hadn't broken yet, but the pressure in the air had changed, like when you open a door to a house fire and feel the heat without seeing the flame. Jody was sitting up, zipped into her sleeping bag, staring through the mesh at the creek. I asked her what was wrong. She didn't look at me. "There's a light," she said. I leaned over her, squinting through the small, warped window of the tent. And there it was, just above the rushing water, maybe 20 feet away, a single orange glow, no bigger than a grapefruit, bobbing just over the surface. It didn't flicker like flames. It pulsed, rhythmic, like breath, and it moved against the wind, like it didn't care what direction the air was going. We watched in silence for a minute, maybe more. Then Jody unzipped the tent. "What the hell are you doing?" I whispered too loud, but she was already standing. She took 2 steps toward the creek, arms crossed over her chest, face unreadable in the dark. "Hello," she called out. "Is somebody there?" The light stopped moving, hung still, suspended like it was waiting for something. Then the voice came, soft, cracked, not echoing off the water but rising out of it. It didn't say Jody's name, it said mine. "Caleb." My blood went cold. Jody turned, looked at me. Her mouth was open like she was about to laugh, but nothing came out. The light pulsed again, brighter this time, like it had drawn strength from my name. And then it drifted closer, upstream, against the current, floating over the water like it didn't weigh anything. I stepped out of the tent. "Don't," Jody said. "Just don't." But I couldn't help it. The voice sounded like my mother. Not her now, but the way she used to say my name when I was small, before the pills, before the silence, before she locked herself in the back room and told us not to knock. I moved toward the bank. The ground was soft, wet. I could feel the creek trying to pull the earth out from under me. The light was maybe 15 feet away now, close enough to see the shape behind it, faint, like fog trying to remember a person. A suggestion of hair, a coat, a hand holding the lantern out, steady. "Caleb," it said again. It wasn't an invitation. It was a statement, like it already had me. I blinked, and the light dimmed. Blinked again, and it was farther upriver, still pulsing, still waiting. I should have gone back, but something in my chest, something I didn't want to name, moved me forward. I stepped into the creek. The water was ice. It surged against my boots, trying to pull me sideways, but I kept moving. Rocks shifted underfoot. I could hear Jody shouting behind me, but it was distant, like she was underwater, like I was. The light led me up the bank, around the bend, into a thicket of bare trees that shouldn't have been there in August. Their bark was grey, sloughing off in strips, like they'd been burned from the inside out. And then it stopped. At the base of the oldest tree, roots twisting into the creek like veins, the light settled. I stepped closer. The ground gave way beneath me. I didn't fall far, maybe 4 feet, but the shock knocked the air out of me. I scrambled to my feet and found myself in a hollow, some kind of old basin choked with mud and broken stone, the kind of place you don't see unless you know to look. And in that hollow, half buried in roots and silt, was a shape, small, curled in on itself. Bones worn down by water and time, a rusted lantern clutched in one skeletal hand. I couldn't breathe, and then I saw it, the other body, just a little farther up, pressed into the crook of the tree, larger, broader shoulders. Hands folded across its chest like it had been placed there. A boy, or what was left of one. The storm broke then. Rain came down in sheets, pounding the canopy above. I stumbled out of the hollow, slipped twice on the slick moss, and ran back through the woods until the tent came into view. Jody was already packing. We didn't speak until morning, didn't speak much after that either. That was 10 years ago. No one ever believed us. The sheriff said what we found was probably just some Civil War graves. Unmarked, unmapped. Happens sometimes out here, they said. Ground gives way, secrets come up. But I still hear that voice sometimes. When the storms roll in. When the wind presses against the house just right. And on certain nights. If I drive past Coldwater Creek and leave the window cracked, I swear I can see a light, moving upstream against the current, pulled by something that never found its way home. 4. The lights watched me build my cabin. After the divorce, I didn't want much, just quiet, a place where no one expected anything of me. So when I found the listing for 5 acres of undeveloped mountain land down in a hollow east of Boone, I bought it without even walking it first. Cash sale. No neighbors, no real road, just a dirt track that cut off a state route and twisted its way through brush and rhododendron like it had to convince itself to keep going. By the time I finally parked my truck and stepped out onto that patch of land, I remember thinking it was the first real silence I'd heard in years. No voices, no TV in the other room, no dog barking over the fence, just wind and trees. I spent the first week in a canvas tent, living off instant oatmeal and beer, hiking the property line and clearing deadfall. My plan was simple: build a one-room cabin by hand. 4 walls, a roof, wood stove, a place I could be alone and not feel like a ghost in someone else's house. The days were long but good. I kept busy, hauled in lumber week by week, dug post holes, watched deer pass through the edges of the tree line at dawn. The land was quiet, peaceful even, until it wasn't. It started about 3 weeks in. I'd finished framing out the first 2 walls and was sitting out on a stump with a thermos of instant coffee, watching the light go soft through the trees. That was when I noticed them. 3 white lights floating maybe 10 feet off the ground. About 30 yards away, just past the edge of the clearing, not flickering, not moving, just there, hanging still between the trunks like something had forgotten to take them with it. I figured it had to be some kind of optical thing, reflections off sap, maybe bugs caught in sunlight. But they didn't fade, and they didn't blink. I stood and watched them for a while, even waved once. They didn't respond. Eventually I shrugged and went back to work, but I kept looking back over my shoulder, and they stayed until the sun dropped behind the ridge. Then, as the last of the light faded, they dimmed and vanished, just like that. They came back the next night. Same time, same place. 3 white lights, evenly spaced, watching. I took my phone out and tried to grab a photo. The screen just showed static, like an old television with no input. I tried a video. Same result. I walked halfway across the clearing toward them. They didn't move, but I felt it in my stomach. That tight, sour feeling like when you're being stared at from behind but can't turn fast enough to catch it. I didn't go closer. After a while, I stopped trying to make sense of it. They weren't bothering me, didn't come near. Maybe some weird forest trick. Maybe I was just tired. I kept building. One evening, I left the tools out by accident. I'd had too much whiskey and passed out by the fire before I remembered. When I woke up and went to work the next morning, something was wrong. Every board I'd nailed down was loose, not removed, just shifted, bent, warped like something had taken them up and put them back down with the nails still in. The nails were driven backwards, heads buried in the wood, points sticking up like little silver thorns. My hammer was missing. I found it 2 days later in the creek, 20 yards downstream, half buried in the gravel like it had been there for years. I laughed it off, told myself I was drunker than I thought. But from then on I noticed other things. Tools moved, my hatchet, my tape measure, my water jug, always just a little ways from where I left them. The lights started appearing earlier, still 3 of them, always just outside the clearing, just high enough to be unnatural. Never blinking, never moving, just watching. I stopped working after dark. One night, I woke up cold in the tent. No fire, no wind, just a strange pressure in the air, like something was holding its breath all around me. I opened the flap and looked out. They were there, all 3, hovering at the edge of the trees. But closer now, maybe 15 feet away. I could see the leaves under them shifting, like static clinging to everything around. They still didn't make a sound. I didn't dare move. They stayed there until the sun came up. After that, I started nailing faster. I worked 12 hours a day trying to get the walls sealed. Something in me was panicking, but not in the screaming kind of way. It was quieter. Like an animal that knows the ground it's standing on isn't safe, but can't tell why. I stopped going into town, ate canned beans and powdered soup. The radio quit picking up stations, even though I could still hear static when I turned the dial. One night, I tried talking to them. I stood at the edge of the clearing, the cabin behind me half finished, and I said, "I don't want trouble, I just want to live here." The lights didn't move, so I said, "If you want me gone, give me a sign." Still nothing. Then I blinked, and one of the lights was closer, just one, 5 feet closer than before. I hadn't seen it move, but it was definitely closer. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found the door I'd been framing splintered on the ground. It looked like it had been twisted, not kicked. The screws were still buried in the frame, turned backwards. The whole structure seemed tired, like it didn't want to be there anymore, like it had changed its mind about standing. I kept working. I started carving symbols into the beams, not crosses, not anything religious, just shapes, loops, circles, things I'd seen in the patterns of tree bark or creek water. I didn't know why. It just felt like maybe they'd understand that I knew they were there, that I wasn't pretending anymore. The lights stopped coming for 2 nights. Then, on the 3rd night, they returned. But this time, there were 4, and they were inside the clearing. I didn't come out of the tent. I watched through the zipper, heart beating like a trapped animal. The lights hovered silently around the unfinished cabin, drifting along the half-framed walls like surveyors. At one point, 2 of them aligned perfectly, one on each side of the doorway, like they were checking the threshold. The 4th light hovered by the window I hadn't cut yet. Then they left, rising slowly above the trees and fading into the dark. I took that as permission, or warning, maybe both. I finished the cabin a week later. It's quiet here now. No lights, no movement, but the house feels strange, heavy, like it resents being here. Sometimes I wake up and the door is open, even though I know I locked it. Sometimes the stove won't light for days, then roars back to life without warning. The woods outside are too quiet. No birds, no bugs, just trees that lean a little too far in. But I will stay, because leaving feels wrong now. Like I wouldn't make it to the end of the trail, like the land wouldn't let me go. Sometimes when I'm sleeping, I dream of the cabin unbuilding itself, nails reversing, wood pulling apart, and something standing outside, watching, waiting, undoing. And when I wake up, the hammer is never where I left it. 55, the glow from the shut down asylum. There's an old hospital sitting on the north side of King's Bluff that everyone around here pretends not to remember. They'll say, "What hospital?" Or, "Oh, that thing's been gone since before I was born," even though it's still there. Still standing, if only halfway. King's Mercy Psychiatric, shuttered in 1978 after a landslide sheared off the lower wing during a thunderstorm that rolled through harder than any in living memory. Folks said it buried the whole basement ward, patients and all. Some said it was only staff down there. Some said they heard screaming under the rocks for days. Some said there was never a landslide at all, just a sealed order from Raleigh and a convoy of trucks in the middle of the night. What nobody ever argued about was the glow. Kids called it that. The glow. Some kind of sick rite of passage. You'd hike up the bluff after dark, sneak around the fence and try to catch a glimpse of the green light that pulsed from the old basement windows. If you saw it, you were supposed to knock 3 times on the bricks and ask for your name back. I never really got what that part meant. Probably just high school myth-making. But the light, that was real. I didn't try until I was 19. I'd heard the stories my whole life, but I never felt like tempting it. Not until one October night, after a bottle of warm bourbon and too many bad memories. My girlfriend had left. My job at the scrapyard was hanging by a thread. I felt like if something bad happened to me up there, maybe it would make more sense than the rest of my life did. So I drove up King's Bluff Road in my rusted-out Dodge and parked where the gravel gave out, right by the old trailhead where the government signs had long since peeled away. It was colder than it should have been for October. Leaves had mostly fallen, dry and sharp underfoot, and the moon was thin and mean overhead. The hike wasn't far, maybe 15 minutes, all uphill, but the silence was the kind that grows in your ears, like the land had stopped breathing. I didn't hear birds or bugs or even the wind, just the sound of my boots and my own lungs struggling up the incline. When I broke the tree line and saw the hospital, I froze. It's hard to describe how something half collapsed can still feel alive. Most of the upper floors had caved inward, like bones folded under the weight of time. Vines choked what little bricks still clung to the frame, and trees had sprouted where patients used to walk, but the basement, the west wing that had sunk, was intact, barely visible, but there. And from one long, narrow window, half covered in dirt and roots, came the glow. It pulsed, not fast, just steady. A slow inhale, then dim, then again. Not a flicker, like a dying bulb. Something slower. Something that wanted to be seen. I stepped closer, maybe 20 feet away, and the air around me turned cold. Not autumn cold, but deep winter, sudden and suffocating. My breath fogged out in front of me like smoke, and my knees went soft under the weight of it. I crouched behind a cedar stump and stared at the window, watching the light throb through the grime. And then I heard it. A humming, soft, like a lullaby hummed through rotted teeth. It rose and fell with the pulse of the glow, and my stomach twisted in response, not from fear exactly, but from some kind of wrongness I couldn't place. Like the sound was inside me, vibrating something I didn't know I had. I crept forward, my foot crunched glass and I winced, but the sound didn't change. Inside that basement window, through streaks of moss and dirt, I saw movement. Not fast, not sharp, just slow, deliberate shifting, shadows rolling across the floor like something wheeled, like old gurneys or wheelchairs. I couldn't make out the source, but the shapes didn't move like people. They moved like something being pushed, guided by hands just out of view. Then the light dimmed again, for longer this time. The humming stopped. Silence returned. Not normal silence, but the kind that leans in close and waits to hear your breath hitch. I stood and backed away. That's when I saw my reflection. In the window, just for a second, I saw myself, but not the me that had walked up there. This version of me was pale, hair wet, wearing a hospital gown. My mouth opened like I was trying to say something to myself from inside the glass. I turned and ran. Didn't care about the path. Just ran full tilt down the trail, branches slapping my face, chest burning. My hands were shaking by the time I got to the truck. I slammed the door, turned the key, and peeled off in reverse, headlights barely catching the road. It wasn't until I hit the main road again that I looked in the rearview mirror. The glow was there, not behind the truck, inside it, faint, green, pulsing gently from the back seat like a heartbeat that didn't belong to anyone living. I didn't turn around, didn't look, I just kept driving. By the time I pulled into my driveway, it was gone. Just me, the truck, and the sound of a distant lullaby I couldn't quite shake from my ears. I never went back, but some nights, when the wind dies down and the trees lean too close to the house, I see that light again. Just a flicker at the edge of the mirror, waiting for me to knock. 66, my brother, never came down the hill. Every summer, from the time I was 10 until the year everything changed, my brother and I were dropped off at our grandfather's cabin in Boone Gap. It wasn't much of a place. Tin roof, no insulation, sagging porch steps, and the kind of air that smelled like wood smoke even in July. But it sat at the edge of something wild. Acres and acres of Appalachian forest where the trees pressed close and the ground never quite dried out. No cell service, no power lines, just creeks full of salamanders and trails worn into the hills by deer and time. Papa used to say the woods up there were old in a way we couldn't understand, that they had memories, but he'd stop short of explaining what that meant. Just spit his tobacco juice into a can and change the subject. Me and Eli didn't think much of it. We were kids. We'd spend our days fishing in the muddy bend of Turnip Creek or sneaking out to shoot empty beer cans with Papa's .22. At night, we'd lay on the roof and stare at the stars while the woods filled up with crickets and whippoorwills. Eli was older by 2 years, taller, louder, the kind of kid who couldn't keep still if you nailed his boots to the floor. I followed him everywhere like a shadow. The summer he disappeared, we were 16 and 18, our last summer up there. Eli had plans for college in Asheville and I was half ready to hate him for leaving. But that night, I remember, we weren't fighting. It was just another humid evening after a day of doing nothing. The power had blinked out around dusk. Probably a tripped breaker in the generator shed, so we lit a few candles and ate cold beans straight from the can. Papa had gone to bed early. He didn't say why, but he looked tired in a way that didn't feel like sleep would fix. It was around 11:30 when we saw it. We'd taken 2 camp chairs out to the tree line behind the cabin, just sitting and listening to the frogs thrum in the distance. Then Eli stood up mid-sentence and said, "You see that? Up on the ridgeline, high and far, maybe 200 feet above us, there was a light, faint, soft blue. Not the cold, clinical kind you get from a phone or LED. This was older. Like a lantern dropped in water. It didn't blink, it pulsed, and it moved, slow and steady, between the trees like someone walking with it held at waist height. We both stared for a while without saying anything. Then Eli said, "Probably some hiker got turned around." I didn't answer. He grabbed the flashlight off the porch rail and started up the narrow trail that cut toward the ridge. I told him to wait, that we should get Papa, but he just waved me off and said, "Back in 10, don't wet yourself." I watched the 2 lights for a while. Eli's flashlight beam was sharp and white, bouncing off rocks and roots as he climbed. But the blue one, the one up on the ridge, kept drifting deeper. Eli's beam stopped about halfway up the hill. Just stopped. Fixed on the ground like he'd set it down upright. But the blue light kept moving. I waited. 10 minutes turned to 30. Then an hour. I stood at the edge of the trail with my own little pocket light, calling his name until my voice cracked. Nothing answered but the wind moving through the trees. I wanted to go up. I really did, but something in me pulled back hard. I've felt fear before, the kind that lives in your muscles and makes you shake. But this was deeper. This was a kind of knowing, like the woods themselves didn't want me climbing that hill. I went back inside and woke up Papa, told him what happened. He didn't curse or panic. He just sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, rubbing his face with both hands. Then he asked if I touched Eli's light. I said no. He told me not to, told me to wait until morning. That was all. I didn't sleep. At first light, I ran up the trail with the flashlight half dead in my hand. The path was muddy from last night's storm, but no new prints, just mine from hours before. And there, about 60 yards in, stood Eli's flashlight, upright, beaming straight down at the ground, still on, still warm to the touch. I looked around, called out until my throat burned, searched for hours. No broken branches, no blood, no shoe prints, just the flashlight and the silence. The sheriff's men came, later that day. Dogs, volunteers, even a helicopter on the second day. Nothing. They asked about the light. I told them, even though I knew how it sounded. One of the deputies, older man, long scar down his neck, asked what color the light was. I said blue. He nodded like he already knew and said, "Ain't the first time." I asked him what he meant, but he just told me to stay near the house until they were done. They never found Eli. Papa died that winter. Never said much after Eli went missing. Some days I'd find him just sitting on the porch, staring up at that ridge like he was waiting to see that glow again. I still go back sometimes. Not often. Just enough to feel close to the memory. The cabin's rotting now. The roof buckled. Door off the hinge. But the trail's still there. And every once in a while, if I stand quiet enough near the edge, I'll see it. That faint blue glow, high up in the trees. Drifting, waiting. I never go after it. Because some nights, when the fog rolls down the hill just right, I can still see Eli's flashlight. Still standing, still on. 7. The thing that floated over my tent. I don't camp alone anymore. Haven't since the summer I spent 3 nights up near Raven's Roost, trying to clear my head after a bad breakup and a worse layoff. I'd been working at a furniture shop in Buchanan, and when they shut down without warning, I figured it was time to get away. I packed a light, sleeping bag, 1-person tent, a camp stove, and an old trail map my uncle had left me. My plan was to stay off-grid for a few days, head high into the Blue Ridge, and just let the quiet soak in. The spot I picked was maybe 6 miles off the nearest fire road, steep terrain, lots of switchbacks. No cell signal, not even a bar. Just mountains stacked like folded cloth. Miles of hardwood. And not another soul in sight. The second day, I bushwhacked higher and found a narrow ridge that overlooked a long drop into Cold Spring Hollow. That's where I pitched my tent. No signs of other hikers, no trash, no trails, just forest so thick, the sunlight broke into ribbons by mid-afternoon. That night, after a meal of rehydrated chili and a few sips of bourbon, I crawled into my bag and listened to the sounds of the woods settling. Crickets, distant tree frogs. A whippoor will cut through the dark. I drifted off sometime around midnight. I woke up to silence. Not the kind of quiet where everything's just still. This was absence. No insects, no wind, not even the soft groan of trees moving against themselves. The air felt heavy, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I sat up and immediately noticed the pressure. It was like my ears needed to pop, like I'd driven into high elevation too fast. The inside of the tent felt wrong, stale, like the air had stopped moving. That's when I saw the light. It passed over the nylon like moonlight, but slower, brighter, more deliberate. A round glow, maybe 20 feet up, drifting silently above the trees. No flicker, no beam, just a sphere of soft white light, about the size of a truck tire, gliding overhead. It didn't bob like a lantern or dip like a drone. It was too smooth for that, like it didn't belong to gravity. I stayed frozen, my breath caught in my throat, pulse hammering in my chest. I told myself not to move, just wait, let it pass. But the light stopped, directly above me. It hovered there, no sound, no breeze, no shadows shifting through the trees, just a stillness so complete it made my skin crawl. Then it began to descend, not fast, not aggressive, just a slow, steady drop. I didn't unzip the tent. I know I didn't. But the next thing I remember, I was standing outside, barefoot, dew chilling the skin of my soles, eyes locked on the light above me. It was closer now, no more than 10 feet off the ground. From that distance it looked like a glowing eye, perfectly round, no visible surface or seams, just light. But it didn't shine out, it pulled in. Like it wasn't lighting the forest around it, just illuminating the inside of itself. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My body was tense, but my mind felt soft, like fog was creeping in from the edges. A feeling bloomed in my chest. Not fear, exactly, but a kind of knowing, like I'd seen this before in some old part of myself that didn't have a name. Something that wasn't memory, but memory adjacent. Something older than I thought. And then I felt it. A tug, not on my body, on my mind, on my will. Something inside me leaned forward, just a little. Just enough to make my knees unlock. I wanted to step toward it, not because I was curious, not because I was afraid, because it felt inevitable, like the tide coming in. And then, just as my foot shifted in the leaves, the light pulled back. It didn't jerk or flash, it simply rose, in a smooth vertical arc, lifting silently back through the trees. It vanished without fanfare, swallowed by the dark canopy above. The silence remained. I stumbled back into the tent like someone waking from a deep sleep. My hands were shaking, my legs were damp with dew. I curled into my sleeping bag and stayed awake until the birds started calling at dawn. I packed up that morning and hiked out without eating. Didn't look back, didn't stop until I reached the truck. Weeks passed before I told anyone. When I finally did, I left out parts. The stillness, the pull, the way I'd felt something familiar inside that light. People hear floating light and think of drones or weather balloons or some weird lightning phenomenon. They want an explanation they can box up and tuck away. But I know what I felt. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't interested in being seen. It was watching, and for a moment, it thought I might be something worth taking. 8, the woman who followed the lights. It was fall when I hiked back up to my Aunt Nora's cabin. Late October, that cold time when the trees go black at the edges and the wind smells like stone. She'd been gone 25 years by then. Disappeared without a trace in '94. Folks in town said she ran off with some man from Roanoke, but I never bought that. She was mountain-rooted, slept with the windows open, knew every call and track in the hills like they were old friends. That kind of person doesn't just leave, they get taken. Or maybe they follow something. The cabin was just as I remembered. Low roof, stone chimney, front steps half rotted through. I came up to clean it out, maybe list the land for sale. Figured I'd stay one night, get it over with. I didn't expect to find her journal. It was under a loose floorboard near the hearth, wrapped in wax paper. Most of it made sense. Bird sightings, weather, dreams. But the last few pages were frantic. Jagged writing, repeat. One line, over and over. They want me to follow. They say they can bring him back. I didn't know who she meant. My uncle died in '89. She never remarried. I read that line maybe a dozen times before the meaning slipped away and became rhythm, like a chant. I should have left right then. That night, the forest got too quiet around 3 a.m. My eyes snapped open, and outside the cabin window, there they were. Lights, small, white, floating like electric fireflies. They trailed up the ridge behind the house, bobbing gently like they were waiting. I didn't grab a coat, didn't grab a flashlight, I just followed. Something in my chest told me I had to. They led me past the old spring, through thickets I didn't remember, into a clearing I'd never seen. A perfect circle of flattened grass in the middle of the woods, and there, standing alone, was a woman. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. The lights stopped, hung around us like a fence. She looked like my aunt, or what my aunt might have become if she'd aged somewhere other than Earth. Her eyes didn't blink. Her skin looked thin, too still. There was no fear in her face, just waiting. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. And then she took a step forward. I stepped back. The lights flickered just once and went out. The clearing dropped into black. I turned and ran. The next morning, I packed everything and left. Never went back. Sometimes I still dream about her. Not the woman from the clearing, the real Nora, sitting on the porch humming to herself, sketching in that little book. And I wonder if she's still out there in some way, walking with those lights, still waiting for someone to follow. I just hope I wasn't the last one who ever did. 9. The blue fire that wouldn't leave. We used to go night fishing every summer, me, my dad, and Uncle Royce. Stillman Lake was our spot. No campsites, no boat ramp, no cell signal. Just this long, narrow lake, pressed deep into a pocket of mountains, surrounded by pine so dense the sun barely touched the water. Dad said the fishing was better when the sky was clear and the wind was dead. Said the stillness made the fish curious. But that kind of stillness, it brings other things too. I was 15 the last time we went. It was early July, heat hanging off the trees like a wet sheet, the kind of air that makes you sweat just thinking. We hiked in around dusk with our gear on our backs. Took the long path to the east bank where the land sloped down into a rocky shore. Royce cracked a beer, Dad lit a lantern, and we cast our lines without much talking. Just the way it always was. By 10:30, we were half dozing, lines in the water, bugs humming around our heads like static. Then Royce sat up straighter, leaned forward, and said, "You see that? I thought he meant the bobber." But it wasn't that. There was a light out on the lake, blue, pale and steady, floating just above the waterline, maybe 30 or 40 yards out. I figured it was a lantern, some other night fisher, maybe someone in a canoe, but it didn't sway, didn't bounce or ripple, no sound, no reflection, just that flame-colored glow, flickering in a way that didn't feel like it came from heat or fuel, like it was imitating fire, not made of it. Dad didn't say anything, but I could see him staring hard. Royce whistled low, like it might answer him. It didn't. Just hovered, flickering in place. Then it moved, slow at first, gliding across the water, not through it, over it. Smooth, deliberate, coming toward us. My chest went tight. We stood, all three of us, the rods forgotten, lines drifting slack in the water. It came within 10 feet of the shore and stopped. Royce, always the brave one, stepped closer. He reached his hand out. Not far, just a slow, cautious stretch. And as soon as he moved, that blue flame zipped backward, fast, maybe 20 yards. Like a string snapping tight, still no sound, no wake. Royce cursed under his breath and looked at us like he didn't believe it himself. "We're leaving," Dad said, that flat voice he used when something was wrong and couldn't be talked about. We packed in less than a minute. Didn't even reel in the lines proper, just wound them and stuffed the poles in our bags. As we turned to hike out, I look back one more time. The light was still there, closer again, but not moving. Not yet. The trail to the truck is long and steep. You have to switch back through the timberline and across a stretch of shale that echoes your steps like whispers. That night, something followed. We didn't hear it, I didn't see it, but we felt it. Like pressure on the back of your neck. Royce kept looking over his shoulder. Dad just muttered prayers I'd only heard him say at funerals. We got to the truck, slammed the doors and peeled off. I was in the back seat, pressed to the window, trying not to look, but I did. There, in the tree line, matching our pace, was the light, still blue, still flickering. We were going 35 through mountain curves, and it never lost ground, not once. We made it home, locked the doors, didn't talk about it. I didn't sleep. And when I did drift off sometime before dawn, I saw it again, not in the woods, not in the lake, but in the reflection of my bedroom window, floating over my shoulder. That was 15 years ago. I've never been back to Stillman. Royce moved to Ohio, doesn't return calls. Dad passed in 19. His tackle box is still in my garage. I haven't opened it since. But sometimes, late at night, I catch that same blue flicker in the corner of a mirror, or the window of a passing car, or the water in my bathtub when the house is too quiet. It doesn't feel threatening. It just watches and waits.